All right, we're good.
Get started. So thank you everybody for coming. My name is Jenny Morris and I am with the Autism Society of Alabama. And I think we all know each other. I'll just get started. This is a very good friend of mine, Amy Varnon, and I'll let her introduce herself. But we'll go ahead and get started talking about socially appropriate behaviors. Go ahead, Amy.
All right. Thank you. Yes, I'm Amy Varnon. I worked in in the autism field for, I guess, since 1998, way back when. I've done a lot of different things. I was a classroom teacher. I was a self-contained classroom teacher, a preschool teacher, an autism specialist, and then a collaborative teacher also. So I kind of have several different experiences. I also worked in home behavior analysis program. So I think it just means I'm really old. That's what I've decided. I've had a lot of opportunity to do a lot of different things with the autism, with people on the spectrum. And I really do love the work. I am currently working as a teacher, just a general education teacher, but I'm here today to talk about social skills because I've continued working with kids on the spectrum in small social skills groups. I started probably about 10 years ago, kind of by accident. There were several private school kids who just needed some social help, some social skills. They needed to improve their social skills, but their academics were fine. So I started that a long time ago. I have a group that I've had about that long. They're getting to be like seniors in high school, but I've had them a really long time. And probably, goodness, now I probably have about maybe 15 to 20 kids probably about 15 kids I see on a weekly basis, but not during coronavirus. So that's what I'm here today to talk to you about how to how to support kids on the spectrum to improve their social skills. So that's kind of what my area of focus has been lately. So that is what we're going to dive into. You can't really talk about autism unless you just talk about what it is, even though I know everybody knows what it is. But it's just, a spectrum disorder. Kids on the spectrum may be nonverbal or have very limited abilities. Others may have average or above average IQ. So that's the spectrum part of it, which kind of made planning this PowerPoint a little challenging because I realized that there is such a wide variety of kids on the spectrum. So I wanted to try to think of some things that would be beneficial to everyone, regardless of the characteristics a child with autism has. So this is a quote that I don't even remember, goodness, it was when I was working in Huntsville City years ago. I came across this quote on a blog, and it's actually been one of the most, it's been one of the most true quotes I think that I've read. I don't really love the term high functioning and low functioning anymore. Like, I think that what we've learned about kids on the spectrum is they have all kinds of abilities, and where they may have a deficit in one area, they're above average in the others. I don't love that terminology, but it was a long time ago, and the quote is still good. But the difference between high functioning autism and low functioning autism is that high functioning means your deficits are ignored, and low functioning means your assets are ignored. I found this to be true in regards to social behaviors just over and over again. I had a student he was in kindergarten, and he is apraxic. He could not talk at all. He didn't have terribly good adaptive behavior skills, but I think that was more a result of his home environment. I think that's just sort of how everybody was. They weren't super clean. But one day I was reading a book to the class, and he ran up to my book and he pointed to a word. And since he didn't talk, we taught him some signs. Like, I know like 30 signs. I don't do sign language, but I learned to teach him the signs of things I knew he would want, like a drink or a cookie or whatever. So he ran up to the book and he pointed to a word in the book, and the word was orange, and he signed it, and I hadn't read it yet. So I knew he was reading it. So I wrote down all the words of all the signs I knew that I had taught him, and he knew every single one. So he's a reader. But I never would have known that. Like, he had to show me that because I wouldn't have known. And so as he grew, he was, his family he was socioeconomically, he was disadvantaged. And so he was very transient. He would pop up here and there in the system. But didn't see him probably for, goodness, probably about 8 or 9 years. And he popped back up at one of our high schools. And I was so excited because I hadn't seen him in so long. So I went to see him, and they were playing a game. I'll never forget. They were playing a game in the classroom, in his classroom. And I looked at him. He was dying to answer the question. Like it was like a little trivia game. And I knew he knew the answer because, for one, it was easy and I knew he would know it. And he was dying to answer. And I told the teacher, I said, I think he knows, calling him. And she said, but he won't be able to tell us. And I was like, oh, like it was so hard. It was a hard thing for me because I was like, well, then ask him to write it down. And so, but they didn't assume that intelligence. They didn't assume that emotional or the social intelligence to be able to participate in a game because he didn't talk. So that really rang true for me in that case. What far more happens though is kids that have what you would consider high functioning, can do the academic work, can follow a schedule or whatever, and maybe even have pretty good classroom behaviors. You attribute to them, a lot of people attribute to them a social intelligence that they do not have. As I've worked in this area, I see it in not just kids on the spectrum, it's also gifted kids. Their IQ is through the roof, and socially it's like on the bottom of the floor. They just don't, it's just like measuring, academic intelligence and social intelligence are two different things. They have similarities, they can both be learned, but definitely kids who have a good, strong skills are often assumed to have an emotional intelligence that they don't have. And so that can cause trouble for them in the classroom environment and at home as well. All right, characteristics of individuals. We know just those repetitive behaviors, delays in social skills, and delays in communication. You really can't separate these three when you're talking about social behaviors because they come into play like in everything, obviously. Social behaviors, when you've got somebody that's really stuck on something and can't move off of it, is going to affect them socially, just like communication. A lack of communication will affect their ability to communicate with their peers. Okay, so the whole deal is that some social behaviors must be directly taught. And it's not the easiest thing to teach, but it can be done. All right, so I was thinking about, if I were a parent, I was trying to think of it from a parent's point of view, but I know we have a couple of teachers here too. When you're considering what you want to teach, obviously you don't want to overwhelm a child or even a young adult by trying to do 25 different things at one time. So there's a few things you want to consider before you implement any kind of social skills instruction, just like academic instruction. What is the age of the child? How old are they? I have a parent that I'm working with. She's trying to get through the quarantine. She's a single mom with her son. And I suggested that she try a schedule with him. And I told her I would make it, but she's like, no, I think I'm going to make it. And she made this schedule and she sent it to me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like she does military, he's 9. She put it in military time. It was funny because she even said, she even scheduled a 15-minute free time in his entire day, like 15 minutes. And I was like, she was cute and she was doing the best she could. And I just told her, I was like, I think that might've been a little lofty of a goal. I think maybe we need to pare that down a little bit and put some time in there for some free time. You want to choose your battles. If I was choosing something, I always chose to work on something that was not my particular favorite thing. I don't really like loud noises. And so if somebody was, hollering out or whatever, I might choose to work on that first. But pick your battles, maybe something that matters to you. If you're trying to build social skills in your family and you have a family that likes to play games, then I would choose that. Because a lot of kids have to be taught to play games and how to follow the rules and how to have good behaviors there. Developmental ability is also important as well. I always say slow and steady wins the race. You can build on social behaviors to make them more and more appropriate. All right, and the other thing I would say is look and see what other neurotypical kids are doing. When I used to do observations in the classrooms, I would always go in and they'd say, oh, he's just really off task. And so before I even looked and did an observation of the student in the classroom I was supposed to be looking at, I looked at a typical student and said, okay, how much is that 5th grader off task? And is it really markedly different from the student I was there to observe? Sometimes we kind of lose our perspective as adults to what's typical developmental appropriate behavior for that age. So you definitely want to see, okay, what would be, maybe talk to your friends or talk to your child's classmate or whatever. Just be sure you keep that in mind. I would also say, and I may have put this later in our PowerPoint. I can't remember if I added it or not. But you also want to kind of think about. I heard a occupational therapist talk once about how important it was when he was teaching kids on the spectrum. He was teaching them. So he was working with them to develop some social behaviors, and he said, "I'll never forget." He said he was struck by the fact that a lot of social skills programs are sort of written to address like what I as a female would value in friendship. But when he was instructing boys, he's like, I went outside and I watched my son, my typical son, riding his bicycle in the circle. And he said he he was riding with a bunch of his buddies. They maybe said like 6 things in an hour because they were activity oriented instead of like emotions oriented. So also I think that's a good thing to keep in mind too. And I will be honest, it is so much easier. I've worked with some girls on the spectrum and I've worked with some boys on the spectrum. Boys are easier to me just because they're more concrete. There's a lot of subtle things with girls that can be hard. So you're also going to want to take those kinds of differences into account as well. All right. So obviously the delays in social understanding can make it difficult to understand emotions, and emotions are super important when you are building a social skills foundation. Kids on the spectrum, they have like typically, in my experience, this is all my experience. I'm not quoting anybody else's experience, but they have 3 emotions typically, which are happy, mad, and sad. Those are the 3 that they know. But if you look at emotions words, there are all kinds of levels of happiness, all kinds of levels of sadness, all kinds of levels of anger. And so we kind of do a disservice by not teaching those systematically or just sort of broadening that over time, their ability to see the emotional scope of things. I have a feeling that's why some kids on the spectrum have big reactions. And we can really use emotions to help them tailor their reaction to what's appropriate for the level of happiness they feel and the level of sadness that they feel. Difficulty understanding what is appropriate and inappropriate to say. My favorite, and this goes along with, okay, so on my slide, I have a misunderstanding of authority underneath that because I have a story that's perfect for both of those things. I have a friend, I've been working with him in social skills for about 10 years. And when he was in the 2nd grade, I just love this story. His teacher gave him 10 minutes of silent lunch. And so he sat down, his lunch started at 11. So at 11:10, he begins talking. Now, if you're a teacher, in a classroom, typically you don't start talking until the teacher says, it's time you can talk now, it's been 10 minutes. But he just started talking. But this was a rule that everybody else at the table knew. And they were looking at him like, dude, what are you doing? You're talking. And he was like, well, it's been 10 minutes. And so the teacher came over and was like, why are you talking? And he just looked at her and said, because I don't think you know how to tell time. And he was totally like legit, you don't know, because the authority on time in his mind is, of course, the clock, not the teacher. So that was something that we had to go over about that. So he for one thing, didn't know better than to say, you must not know how to tell time. And two, he just really did not attribute the authority of timekeeping to his teacher. He attributed that to the clock. All right, difficulties making and maintaining friendships. I will say that I have noticed a shift in this in the last 20 years. I feel like this part is getting better as kids are more included in school settings. I do feel like kids on the spectrum are making better friendships and maintaining them. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Difficulty understanding nonverbal communication. That's a fun thing. That's an exercise I do in our social skills group. Is I'll say, what does my body language tell you? And it'll, I might be going like this, and they're like, you're swatting at a fly. They don't sometimes understand that body language. And then a desire to discuss a certain topic and lack of understanding about reciprocity. So that's what I see a lot in my social skills groups, where I have a gentleman who's amazing. He knows so much about aircraft carriers. I didn't even know there was that much to know. He knows so much about aircraft carriers and also trains. We'll talk about that again in a little bit too. But and he's so cute because he'll be like, well, of course, Miss Varnon, And I'm like, I do indeed not know. That is all news to me. But his desire to discuss that is very strong, and it leaves the rest of us a little tired of that one particular topic. So that's something that just a misunderstanding about the fact that I like that so much that maybe you don't. And then that's just a little thing about just some different um, specific interests that some of my friends have had over the past. Delays in social understanding can cause difficulty understanding age-appropriate activities that require them to participate in imaginative interactions, and difficulties understanding body language, which I kind of alluded to before. Okay, this is my body language story. These are the Varnon children. They're my own personal children. It's my favorite. And I really like to show this to my kids to say, what do you think happened here? Because to me, it's so obvious, and they never almost ever get it right. So here they are. They're so cute. And this is about, picture number 425. So my patience was at an all-time high. And oh, look at that. What's going on here? The little girl on the left is making a face. And then that's the conclusion. So there's a little pinching situation going on, which I really wish I would have just gone ahead and made that my Christmas card picture that year. I don't know why I didn't, but it's fabulous. But anyway, so that's just an example of how what's obvious to me can sometimes be missed with some of the kids that I work with. Okay, so I try to be practical strategies to promote understanding and teaching social skills. All right, imitation is super important, and this really comes into play with kids that are younger. When I was working in a preschool class, pretty much the very first thing we taught kids was imitation. And at the time, I don't know that I fully understood it, because when you're working across the spectrum and you're working and focusing on one specific area, you don't see how 10 years later that was important always. But imitation is probably, it's just super important. And, we would just do imitation, like do this, just very simple imitation things. And the reason that that's important is because they get older in the social realm. And you look at the second one, it's teach context clues, referencing those around you. So if you see everybody else stand up, that's the time to imitate them. If you may not know why you're standing up, but if everyone else is standing up, it's a good chance you're supposed to be standing up too. So teaching imitation usually takes place in about kindergarten. Some kids automatically get it. Like some kids do not need a lot of work in this area, and then some kids do. So that sometimes has to be systematically taught. Break up social skills into smaller parts. Reinforce what your child does well. Reinforcement is just really huge in any area of teaching across the spectrum, and really children in general. Just really respond best to praise. Sometimes you have to really look for what to praise. Sometimes you have to catch them being good or doing the right thing socially. But any sort of positive feedback they get is important. Use specific praise. So I really like how you opened the door for me, or I really like how you shared your candy, or I really like how you were talking to, your friend when I picked you up. Just anything as specific as you can be. Be patient, work on a few things at a time, and always make a specific plan for a social situation with your child, and always plan an exit strategy. So if you're going out into public, or if there's a birthday party, I thought about this today. How many times have Billy, Varnon, and I gone somewhere where like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We can only stay 45 minutes. So we got to pick up the kids. You go do this. I'll go do this. We'll meet back up. We'll say goodbye and we'll leave. Like that's a plan. Like that's your party plan or whatever. Or if it's where you don't really want to be, you're like, okay, we'll go 15 minutes. We'll make an appearance. So that is always good for kids who are preparing to go into a social situation where they might be uncomfortable. Especially birthday parties, because birthday parties can be loud, things can happen that are unexpected, and they just need to know ahead of time, okay, if you become overwhelmed, or if there is a situation where we need to leave, then this is our plan. You can always also have like maybe even a code word, like, I don't know what it could be, Barbie, Barney, I don't know, but that just means it's time to go. I thought I went to a play at the Fantasy Playhouse this year, and I saw a class of kids, probably from a local high school, and I could tell that they had done such a good job to prepare those kids to go out, because there were several of them that they had a few, that they took a break and they came back in, and so it's always a good thing to do to prepare just a plan, like, especially if what the routine's going to be. Some birthday parties like pump it up. My kids are older, so I don't know what the current birthday party is now, but you could even ask, like, so what's the schedule of the party? Do you eat cake first? Do you jump first? Like, how is that going to look? And then if you can prepare them for that schedule of activities, it will really be helpful and help them be successful. So I said to develop a code word. Okay, so teach specific social behaviors. And so this is something that I have worked on a good bit. So some specific social behaviors that are like simpler are greetings. Say hello, welcome someone into your home. Some other social behaviors that I've taught are, okay, you can make 3 comments about your specific topic, and then you have to, then we get to move on into a different topic of interest for someone else. One of the things I've done in a group that might be interesting to high schoolers is it's like a deck of cards. And so I'll introduce the topic of my choice. And so then they have to make a comment about it. They have to ask a question about it. So they'll have like a comment card, a question card, and there's another card. I can't remember what it is. But so when we have the conversation, they lay their card down when they make a comment. So then they only have to ask a question. And it's just a way to make that a concrete conversation. The more concrete you can make things for kids on the spectrum, the easier it is for them to, to really kind of understand what the expectations are. So those are some things that you can do to teach specific social behaviors. A lot of visuals are so helpful, and we'll talk about visuals later. Visuals are just so important. Even if you have a reader, Boardmaker is great, and there's a lot of access to visuals like picture symbols or whatever. But honestly, I'm a little bit lazy, and I don't necessarily have the time to go, pound something out on the computer. But if I have a reader, I'll just write it. I'll just write a sentence or whatever. That really is a powerful way to get a student or a child to understand what the expectations are. And there's something about it being written down that's just super powerful. Use a journal for your child or your students to record positive and negative social outcomes. It's really nice. I've read a book about, there was someone on the spectrum, and they actually wrote a book about how they did this. They kept a journal of, this was my behavior and this is what happened. So I screamed in the cafeteria and then nobody wanted to sit by me. And it's long, like this whole journal, which is fabulous. But a lot of times it allows for reflection. Okay, so I did that, and this is what the social outcome was. And it kind of gives them an opportunity to really weigh, is that something that was beneficial to me? Did that help me? And a lot of times sometimes the answer to that can be no, no, that wasn't so helpful. Discuss why developing appropriate social habits benefits the individual. And I've done this a lot because I have marvelous students that just really like themselves quite a lot. And they really, don't see the need. They don't really see the need to change and do it a different way. So I have one that I've worked with a long time. And right now, we used to, way back in the day, we used to work on how to address your teacher in a kind manner, how to ask a question, how to participate in a group. And now we really, our sole focus, he would probably tell you that I say this a lot, is that it's not all about you. He's a very interesting person, and he's got a very pleasing personality, but people like him because he's him, and he doesn't have to do anything really to make people like him, because he's super gifted, and he's interesting, and he knows a lot of facts, but he doesn't really have too many close personal relationships. But he's capable of having close personal relationships. But he is just almost spoiled in that he's so well liked, but he doesn't ever have to ask someone how their day was. And he's well liked at school, but it's hard on his family, because when you're in a family, it's a different dynamic than if you're just like the popular kid at school because you're different and you're cool and you've got all these skills. So really lasting behaviors, I have to really show him why it benefits him to not just be a relationship celebrity, but like really a relationship participant. And so I'm still working on that. I'll let you know how that goes. He likes his social status quite a lot. It just doesn't really work so much in his family. But I've also talked to him about, what if you want to get married someday? That's a totally different dynamic. All right, define emotion. So this is something I've done a lot of as well. So emotions, like I said, happy, sad, mad, those are the big 3 that they identify with. One of Tony Atwood's activities that I've used quite a lot was it's just a really awesome activity. It's a rope, and you put a rope on the floor, and then you print out all these different emotions, like delighted, excited, frustrated, exasperated, all of these different emotion words. And then you have the students rank them from 1 being the happiest you could ever be to 10 being the saddest or most upset you could ever be. It seems like happy inside is one rope, and then there's another one for like excited or whatever. But so they define the words, they put them in order on the rope of what they think it would be. And so you then are able to, this is a really concrete way to teach emotions and define them so that they really understand that there are varying levels of happy, there are varying levels of sad, or angry or frustrated or whatever. And so one time, the first time I did this, I'll never forget, I had a bunch of, they were like the third and fourth grade mathematician geniuses at the school that I have a relationship with. And so it was a math Olympics. And so they had just taken their math Olympics test. And so they were just all talking about the math Olympics. And so I said to them, I said, okay, so we did our little scale. And I said, I want you to go stand on the part of the rope about how are you going to feel if you don't place in the math Olympics. And so, they all went to like the number 10, the worst day ever, the one they could never recover from. And I said, okay, well, how would you feel if you didn't even make the math Olympics team? But they had already gone to 10. So there was nothing worse than not getting a medal. So they really had to reevaluate. And so I said, well, let me ask you the first question again. How would you feel if you didn't get a medal? And then they all backed to 9, because even though that'd be bad, it was not bad as not getting to go in the first place. So it was just a really helpful way for them to have a concrete, and we did a lot of those examples, like how do you feel when you go to the fair? How do you feel when your mom reads you a book? That's just a really good exercise. If you're interested in that, you can Google Tony Atwoody's great. All right, allow students to practice the emotion skill they have created, and that's what we did. I use mirrors a lot to practice for other, for kids that maybe don't have quite the vocabulary. And for all those emotion words, we do mirrors. So make a happy face. Let them show me your mad face. And then also trying to identify those emotions in others based on their expressions. A lot of times those things sometimes, not a lot of times, sometimes those things just have to be directly taught. Did I misspell teach? No, I didn't. It just looked funny. All right. Model and support understanding about emotion. So modeling is a big, modeling is huge. And again, once you've tried to imitate, the modeling really helps. So you can use exaggerated facial expressions to help them know what to expect. The mom look and the teacher look for our students sometimes are just right over their heads. They're not paying attention to our face. So sometimes I've caught myself doing it before, and I'm like, they're not looking at my face. So sometimes you have to directly teach that. Help define a variety of emotions. They have, by reinforcing the vocab. Okay, yeah, this is a good one. So this is one of my friends. I think Jenny Morris will know who I'm talking about. But this mom has done a good job over the years defining emotions for her child. So if he's crying, she would say, "Oh, are you sad?" And so if he's excited, "Oh, you seem excited." If you can label the emotion that they're having accurately, you definitely want to be accurate because you don't want to send a mixed message. If you can label it, and try to use more of those good emotions words, like, "Oh, you must be frustrated. Are you frustrated?" Because this young man in particular will say, when he is excited, he'll say, "Are you so excited?" But that really means, "I'm so excited." But because he's learned that word, that's what that word means. He has a broader range of emotions because over just time, that's what was spoken to him. That vocabulary was spoken to him. So that is an excellent thing to do as a parent and also a teacher. But try to use as many of those emotion words as you can. You can also point out the emotions in others in movies or TV shows. I couldn't use it because it wasn't appropriate, but there was something about Friends, like all of the emotions on Friends. There's a lot of good, YouTube is pretty good now. Like you can find all kinds of things on YouTube to help kids practice recognizing emotions of others. So, just kind of look around. There's some good resources now. All right, so social stories. Everybody knows what a social story is, just about, I would think. But social stories just tell, they kind of help a student understand what the expectation is in their environment, and it tells them what to do. It doesn't necessarily point to what they've not done correctly. And I have a student who, he was a preschooler, and if you've ever heard me talk, you may have heard this story before. It was just the biggest, greatest social story success I've ever had. sorry, it bears repeating. But he was in preschool, and he was really like, the teacher called me. She's like, he's hitting people all day. And teachers, I'd be like, yeah, he's not hitting kids all day. And then, but I did an observation. I'm like, oh, he is indeed hitting kids all day. Like, it was like 70 times in 13 minutes. I was like, okay, let's stop this observation. So anyway, but he was smiling. So he wasn't mad. He wasn't trying to hurt anybody. It was like a way for him to interact. He was young, and I wasn't sure it was going to work, but I did write a social story about how to interact with his peers. And so the deal was, we talked about, the importance of saying good things to your peers, all of the right things to say. And then I think there was just something about that physical interaction that he was craving, just something about the physical interaction between him and the student, which he was hitting them to get. And so I did say, if you want to touch your friend, you can ask them to give you a high five. And so we read it to him a few times. And a week later, I texted the teacher, how's he doing? And she was like, it's like he's not doing it anymore. Like, he went from 3 weeks of constant to not at all. And so they also talked to the other students about the strategy, this is what you do. But he had this red fire truck hat, and he was like, that was his toy, his go-to toy. He loved that fire truck hat. And so that tended to be a trigger, and they kind of put it up because it was just ridiculous. Well, it just so happened that the day I went back to do my post observation, mainly I was just so proud that it stopped doing it. I was so excited to see it. I went in during their center time, and lo and behold, somebody got that fire truck hat off the shelf. And I thought, well, this will be the test right here, because he had the fire truck hat on. So he runs up to the fire, because he sees that fire truck hat, and he looks at the little boy. And I knew I was like, oh, he's about to hit him. And the little boy just so beautifully, I could see on his face, he knew it too. He's like, uh-oh, he's about to hit me. He just stuck up his hand. He said, do you want to give me a high five? And they high-fived, and it was over. And it was like, oh my stars, it's the easiest thing ever when it works. It doesn't always work. I found it works more with readers than it works with non-readers. Non-readers respond better to, I think, pictures, visuals, but it was just the thing. And actually throughout his, he's in high school now, his teachers all the way through grammar school, they would send me an email, can you please write a story about this or this or this? And so that was just super effective with him. Now we're to the point where he is just he's just really brilliant in math. And I don't say that lightly, but it's like super, super smart, strong math student. And so now, because he's another one that doesn't really understand why he needs to change his behavior. And so my thing that I'll say to him is, if I have a math question, who am I going to ask? And he'll say, you're going to ask me. And I said, yeah. And I'm going to believe what you say. And I said, if there's an issue with social skills, who are you going to believe? And he'll say, I'll believe you. Sometimes when you have them a long time, they just fall in line and they don't even know why they do it. It's beautiful. All right. Use of visuals to support understanding. Social rules are really important. And that's what I do with him. Sometimes you just have to say, until if the child really can grasp the concept, I'll just say, you may not understand, but you just have to trust me. This is the rule. It is the rule. One of my students got really interested in MLS listings, the housing listings. And he was, it was because they moved, but he has this photographic memory. So he was memorizing all of them. But then he was starting to ask people that he didn't know very well how many bedrooms were in their house and where did they live and how much did they pay? And it was just intrusive. It was not appropriate. And so we had to talk about that. And I finally just had to say, because I knew where he was coming from, but I just said, you just have to trust me. This is getting creepy. You're getting to the point where people are starting to feel like you're, looking for them during the day. So visual cool down strategies are really important. I always say that for kids on the spectrum. One of the things I really like to see, I don't expect them not to have, be overwhelmed, have a flooded sensory system at some point. But what I hope is, and I always say, I just want them to maintain their dignity in front of their peers. And then when they get home or when they get back to my classroom, that's when they can, express their emotions and go through the cycle. It's not that they don't have them. It's just that they have them in the right space, in the right place where it's safe and they're not making anyone uncomfortable. So visuals really help with that. My turn, your turn is important and make things as concrete as you can. So here's something that I could do a whole hour on, because it really is the crux of the matter with social behavior when you're teaching social behaviors. I have one student when we're talking about the size of the problem. So Michelle Garcia Winner wrote Social Thinking, and she's got really good materials for students on the spectrum. And my favorite that she has that I use all the time is the size of the problem. There are big problems, there are medium-sized problems, and there are big problems. So I'm sorry, small problems, medium-sized, big problems. And so when you have a small problem, you should have a small reaction. When you have a medium problem, you should have a medium reaction. And when you have a big problem, then you would have a big reaction. But where she does is she defines what those problems are. A small problem is something that might be unpleasant, but you can manage yourself. You know, a big problem is something you're going to need an adult to help you with. So I love how she defines those problems, because then you can match the expected reaction to them. It's just a really nice, concrete way to do that. And I use that a lot with it, especially my school age kids that I work with. I'll just say, you know, one of my students the other day yelled at his teacher. And I was like, well, why did you yell? And he was like, well, I didn't understand my math. And I was like, well, is that a small problem, a medium-sized problem, or a big problem? And he was like a big problem is an emergency that needs an adult's attention. A medium-sized problem is it's unpleasant and you might need an adult's help, but it's not like nobody's in danger. And so we talked about that and how his reaction was out of bounds with the size of his problem. So that's a really good thing to do. Another thing that we talk about is making people feel uncomfortable and when unexpected and expected behaviors. And so we really talk a lot about unexpected and expected behaviors. When I'm playing in a group and somebody throws something, that's an unexpected behavior. And when there's an unexpected behavior, people feel uncomfortable. So first you practice defining unexpected and expected behaviors, and then practicing just the discussion, broadening their theory of mind about how that might make someone else feel, and then how that other person would see them as a result. So those are just some good ways to teach that. All right, so teach socially appropriate behaviors through games. I love games. We play a lot of games in my social groups. It's just really fun. So if you have, and here's just a variety. I have kids that are like, they can do Go Fish, Spot It, Connect Four, and Uno. And really all of my kids will do any of those at any given time. Those are very simple games that can be cut short. Maybe not Uno, but definitely Spot It is a short game that goes fast. Connect Four is a short game that goes fast. These games teach turn taking, which is important, and they teach following the rules, which is important. One of the things I like about games is their leisure skills as well. So if you have someone that's not going to live independently and post school, you have this big school, you know, that you this big space of time to fill. And so if games give kids a way to participate meaningfully with their families, some good family time meaningfully. And so I just really think it's important. I didn't used to think it's as important as I think it is now, but that's because I've worked longer, so the kids I knew as preschoolers are now adults. And so I see how it is important to build them opportunities to socialize with their family and be successful. All right, so games for older kids or kids that are readers and can really get into a deep game. This I play with my social skills groups as well. Ticket to Ride is a game about trains. And so your Ticket to Ride is a really good way to, if you know, I don't know if you still do, but we always had our Thomas the Train lovers, you know, just love Thomas the Train. Ticket to Ride is a really good bridge to a more appropriate appreciation of trains. It's a good game. They play it a lot. They like it. Monopoly, they like to play Monopoly. Risk is another one that they play a lot. Exploding Kittens. Strange Deaths is a weird one, but they love it. And then Yahtzee, we'll play Yahtzee a lot. Monopoly, a funny story about Monopoly is one of my friends came over and nobody wanted to play Monopoly with him except so I made my personal child, Abigail. I was like, Abigail, come play Monopoly. Abigail's really cheap with her money. And so she didn't want to buy any properties. And so she refused to buy properties. And but then she realized she had to start paying rent. And she was like, I hate this game. This is the worst game ever. She was not demonstrating very good social behaviors at that point. But my other students really got a kick out of it. My other student did. He was like, it was good for him to see someone else who did not follow the rules. The good thing is that during games, like our kids are so rule following, like they're such great rule followers that they will call out a cheater in a minute. It's so funny. I actually really enjoy that. For sure. All right. So teach socially appropriate behavior for younger kids during play. Pretend play is super important. Again, when I was younger, I didn't really I did not get I didn't get the importance of pretend play that like I do now. But with pretend play, basically you help a student think more abstractly by pretending something is something that it's not. Like a banana is not really a phone. But when are able to see that you're just using the banana to pretend it's a phone, that actually has a lot of implications later on when they're reading with reading comprehension. I got to understand that more when I was a collaborative teacher. That anytime you can just really develop those pretend play games, it helps them have a better understanding of figurative language and all kinds of things. So that's an important thing. And again, you can start small. It doesn't have to be big. Legos are good. Puzzles are good. Sports or PE games. And I have a whole list of those in a minute. Paper dolls, dress up trains, anything. You can teach, I always said, especially language, you can teach language in any activity. So you can teach what you want them to know during whatever activity is their preference. It's always easier to teach social behavior when they're doing something that they enjoy. Now, something that is not as easy, some of my kids don't love physical activities like sports. Like it's just not their favorite, but it is important, not just for the sake of doing a sport, but for the sake of developing relationships in that community. Okay. So as much as you can build a community for a student, that's a good thing. So plus if they're going to see those things in PE and that might be their time to shine, it's good when they can come into a situation where they do understand what the rules are. So kickball, baseball, football, yoga, volleyball, cross country, cooking, sewing, any kind of activity that they might be able to learn and become somewhat good at is going to widen their circle of people that they can interact with. Yoga, I kind of fell upon this by accident. I had a group of students that came in. They came right after school, and I don't know why it took me like 2 sessions to realize they've been sitting all day, but they were just all over the place. They wouldn't sit down, they wouldn't listen. So I was like, okay, we've got to switch this up because it's not working for me and it's not working for them. So instead of getting right to the seating part and the lesson part, I started doing the Cosmic Kids Yoga. I don't know if you've seen it. It's fabulous. It's like this this delightful Australian woman, and she has these Cosmic Kids Yoga adventures. So there's like a Star Wars adventure, there's an under a sea adventure. There's so many of them. And so instead of getting right to the table activity, they would do 10 minutes of yoga upon entering the social group. And and in that particular group, it's got a pretty wide age range by accident. So there was a kindergartner and there's also a 4th grader, and they all love the Cosmic Kids Yoga. So those are really good. That's a really good thing. And what I liked about it was they could all participate in the same thing side by side. It was a really good parallel kind of play existence activity. All right, so these are 3 books, and I chose them based on sort of, the first one is a picture book, but I love using these to teach social skills to my kids. How Full is Your Bucket for Kids? That's a really good one. And it's also a good one to make social skills more concrete, because I would say during a social group or whatever, once I read the book, now, did that behavior fill someone's bucket? And they would be like, no. Or if they did exhibit a good behavior, I would say, you know what, that behavior just really filled my bucket. It just talks about how you have an imaginary bucket, and when people say nice things, it's like putting water in. When people say unkind things, water drips out. So that's a really good book to use. Wonder is my favorite book to use with social skills instruction, because it is a treasure trove. I don't know, there's a movie about it, but the book's so much better. And I'm reading it with a student right now over Zoom, and it's funny in all the right parts, but it's also, there's a lot of opportunities to say, well, why do you think he was nervous? Or why do you think he was uncomfortable? Or why was he sad? Or why do you think they behaved the way? It's just awesome. It's such a good one just to read and then talk about. And then How to Win Friends and Influence People. So I have a great kid on the spectrum who is going to college next year, and he feels weird coming to me. Like, he feels like this isn't something I should need. I shouldn't have to come. So, but we like to play games, and that's good. But getting a lesson in just is not very. It's difficult. It's really hard. So I thought one day, I thought, well, you know what? We're going to do a book study on how to win friends and influence people. And it really was the best thing I've done with him, because that's a book lots of people read. He's very, very bright, so it wasn't, wasn't an issue as far as understanding the language. And I mean, it just really worked well, because the things that he was really sort of lacking in, we were able to discuss, came out through that book. It's just a really good book, for sure. So that's another one I really enjoy. All right, so the last thing we're going to talk about is just some of my experiences, just random thoughts that I had that I might wanted to share. One is, really, there's a growing number of gifted kids and kids with ADHD or ADD who are benefiting from social skills instruction. I would say about a third of the kids that I work with are gifted. They don't have a diagnosis of autism or anything. They're just gifted kids that have a low social IQ. So social skills are good for a lot of kids. So if you're in the school setting, it's not bad to include all kinds of kids together. It's actually helpful. Girls have more difficult time adjusting to the dynamics of the group than boys. I find that girls are a little less, they're more resistant. Like the girls I've worked with are more like, I don't need this. I don't have any friends, but it's not my fault. It's a very, it's an interesting pattern that I've seen. And so let's see. I have someone in my household trying to make hand motions to me. Sorry. Girls have a more difficult time so the group dynamic is harder. I have kids on the spectrum make strong friendships with other kids on the spectrum. I've seen this so often. The kids in my social groups are now friends with one another. They are like, they go to each other's birthday parties. They get together on, the weekends, if they do it. Now, some of them are not, they still just, school is enough of social interaction for them, and they kind of like to retreat at home. But I've seen some really sweet friendships grow out of social groups. A child's selective interest can become age appropriate over time, which is like the Ticket to Ride game I was telling you about. A lot of times you can take what that really restrictive interest is and make it more mature and more age appropriate for them. All right, so don't be afraid of temporary setbacks. Like, there's always a great idea that doesn't go, or a good lesson that just doesn't end up going very well. But that's going to happen, but just keep trying. It's a long haul. One of the things I always say is that I can see it with the kids that I've worked with a long time, over years. There are some things they believe, because we've spent so much time forming that foundation of social behaviors, like an understanding of social behavior. So they now believe that, because we've had so many brushes with that skill. And I heard yesterday, and this wasn't related to social behaviors, but when you hear something 7 times, it like becomes truth in your mind. So it helps. Like, social skills instruction takes a place over a long time. But also keep your sense of humor. What makes the job fun is all of those funny things that happen on the way, and just the kids are just delightful. They're just the most fun. So definitely don't ignore the social skills instruction part of a child's IEP, or of their development, because it really is so important. And as they get older, it really is a lot of times more important than the academics that they learn. So, well, I appreciate you all having me. That is all I have today.